a prominent actor of film and stage, a bass baritone concert singer, writer, multilingual orator, scholar, lawyer, civil rights activist, and professional athlete, Paul Robeson was all this and more. He achieved worldwide fame during his lifetime for his artistic accomplishments and his outspoken radical beliefs which clashed with the Jim Crow climate of his time. Despite being one of the most internationally famous cultural figures of the 20th century, persecution by the U.S. government and media virtually erased Robeson from mainstream U.S. culture and history. Born Leroy Robeson on April 9, 1898 in Princeton, New Jersey, he was the first major concert star to popularize old Negro spirituals and was the first black actor of the 20th century to portray Shakespeare's Othello on Broadway. To date, this production holds the record for the longest-running Shakespeare play on Broadway. His roles in both U.S. and British film industries were some of the first parts ever created that displayed dignity and respect for black film actors, paving the way for Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte. At the height of his career, Paul Robeson chose to use his art to speak out against fascism in the U.S. and abroad, thus becoming a prime target of the communism paranoia of the 1940s and 50s. The cause for his persecution centered not just for his beliefs in socialism and friendship of Soviet people, but also for the passionate work toward the liberation of colonized people of Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, and the Australian Aborigines. His support of international brigades, his efforts to push for anti-lynching, and the racial integration of Major League Baseball, and many other causes that went against white supremacism on 6 continents. After his death on January 23, 1976, Paul Robeson has continued to be revered and celebrated throughout the world. He was truly a man who saw a commitment to the oppressed, particularly black people. It is because of his clear vision of justice that he is remembered as a great black man and citizen of the world. This is Our History in Black.
Dark is all week on the Mississippi, dark is all week while the white folks play, pulling them boats from the dawn to sunset, getting no rest till the judgment day.
It's the song forever associated with Paul Robeson. In 1928, his role in the musical Showboat earned him the princely sum of $600 a week and fame on both sides of the Atlantic. It was the beginning of an outstanding career on the stage and screen.
Let me go away from the white man boss. Show me that stream called the River Jordan. That's the old stream that I long to cross.
Robeson grew up near this church in Princeton, New Jersey, where his father, who was an emancipated slave, was the minister. At nearby Rutgers University, Robeson was only the third black student in nearly 200 years. He was an outstanding scholar and athlete, and the star of the football team. But some colleges refused to compete with Rutgers while their team included Robeson. It was just one of many racial slurs he suffered. From Rutgers University, Robeson went on to law school and then joined a New York law firm. It became clear, though, that the firm's wealthy white clients would never let Robeson try a case before a judge. His legal career ended effectively when he buzzed a stenographer to take a memo, and she told him, "I never take dictation from a nigger."
Put on the skillet, put on the lid, Mammy's gonna bake a little shortening bread.
Spurned by the law, Robeson's voice and physique were his passport to success on the stage. But while the critics gave him rave reviews, some hotels would refuse to give him accommodation.
He was so wonderful to be with when he was with you that you couldn't help but forgive him.
Paul Robeson Jr. is the only child of his father, and perhaps his greatest champion. Paul Sr. was not the most attentive of fathers, nor the most faithful of husbands, but for his son, these were minor flaws.
I think he saw himself as a forerunner for not only his own people, but for all those who were disadvantaged and oppressed around the world. So I think he felt he had a mission to perform that was far beyond responding to some personal insult. He was rather to the extent one can be, rather impersonal about that. I mean, he didn't take it personally, or put another way, he felt he had a much broader mission to perform than to get tangled up in responding to some stupid racial insult.
Robeson's many stage and screen roles underscored his deep understanding of black culture. But his work was not universally applauded by America's black community, where he was sometimes accused of promoting racial stereotypes. This British film, Sanders of the River, was denounced by Robeson, who accused the producer of tricking him by changing the script after Robeson's part had been shot.
Every time I've seen the beautiful face of your great king, my heart has filled with joy.
When have you seen his face?
No. Oh, little round pieces of silver.
I think that all of his performances, in one way or another, advanced the cause of African Americans and colored people the world over because of his enormous personal dignity, regardless of what role he was playing. He, I would say more than anyone else this century, challenged the cultural foundations of American racism. That is, he completely shattered the stereotypes, even when playing stereotypical roles like Sanders. And the best proof is I've met many Africans who saw this film as children or young men and women and said for the first time, despite the propaganda of the film, we saw a dignified, powerful black male image on the screen, despite the script. So I think that's a measure of his success.
Swing low, sweet chariot, come in but carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, come in but carry me home.
In the post-war years, Robeson threw himself passionately into left-wing politics, his main concern being racial injustice. In the process, he allied himself with a number of communist organizations and became stridently pro-Soviet in his public speeches. The Cold War was raging, and Robeson was seen by many Americans as a traitor. A Robeson concert in upstate New York provoked a riot, injuring 150 people. Increasingly, he found it difficult to find a venue for his concerts. The notorious Senator McCarthy soon had Robeson in his sights, and in 1953, Robeson's wife Essie was called before McCarthy's Senate Investigating Committee.
But in the meantime, you're white and I'm Negro, and this is a very white committee, and I feel I must sort of protect myself.
Well, the only person who's been discussing race today is you.
Yes.
You say you're a second-class citizen. I think that every communist in this country is and should be considered a second-class citizen.
Unable to silence Robeson, the American State Department found an effective way to clip his wings. They confiscated his passport. For 8 years, he was, in his own words, a prisoner in his native land. Finally, when the ban on his travel was lifted, Robeson was greeted as a hero in Europe while remaining a non-person in America.
As you get on your feet again, everybody is your long lost friend.
Now America is reassessing Robeson's contribution to the 20th century. A new one-man play starring Avery Brooks has opened in Washington, and a major biography is edging up the bestseller lists. Both stress his artistic legacies as well as his unswerving commitment to the cause of America's blacks.
My own view is that the general public has accepted two things. One, that he was one of the great artists of the century, and two, one of the great men of the century, black or white. The evaluation of his politics still remains quite fuzzy, but now there's enough material out for people to begin to make up their own minds. And finally, the personal portrait is still fuzzy. It still remains to be filled out, I think, although both, in different ways, the play and the biography, though deficient in terms of personal portrait, have made an important contribution to expanding the discussion, to providing more material for people to evaluate.
Ayoko, 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 Yegade, Ayoko, Yegade, Ayoko, Ayoko, Ayoko.
It's now 13 years since Paul Robeson died at the age of 77 after a long illness. At his funeral, his son referred to him as a great and gentle warrior. It would seem that only now is America starting to appreciate his strength.
I wouldn't say that he was crushed. I would say he went out unflinching, unbound, and unrepentant, as the tape recordings of his last speeches and conversations show. He said some people, I'm paraphrasing, but he said some people think that I might have done things differently, but I don't regret anything I've done. And he said, if you want to be free, you have to suffer sometime.